Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Island Sailing Club. If I can just introduce myself, I'm Rod Nichols. I'm the Commodore of the Island Sailing Club, but probably more important to you, I'm the Principal Race Officer for the race as well. So welcome everyone to the Island Sailing Club, and a special welcome to the Raymarine weather briefing. This is our 81st anniversary or running of the race, and this will be the 9th year that Raymarine have provided this valuable contribution to the race. So thank you, Raymarine and everybody, for your support as one of our race partners. Many of the competitors will have seen Raymarine's weather and tactics video online in the last few days, and tonight's briefing will give further insight into the weather and tide with useful nav tips to help you get round only quickly but also safely, and that is very important that you do get round safely. Libby Greenhall is the Scandia Team GBR meteorologist working with RYA Olympic and Paralympic squads. It says a very experienced sailor and regular in the Solent. Her knowledge and tips will be very useful for all of us, and myself included. Hand it over to Libby.
Thank you very much. I think I'll just pass that over, sorry. Hi, welcome everyone. As already said, this is the Raymarine weather briefing for the JP Morgan Asset Management around the island race for 2012, and appreciate there's probably a wide range of experience, as well as also a wide range of boats that are going to be out on the water tomorrow. So hopefully I'll cover the areas reasonably well, that you'll all get something out of this out of this weather briefing, and hopefully help you round the course a little bit quicker, and also, as I said, in a safe manner. I mean, starting off with probably the sort of key things I like to think. We'll be pleased to know it's going to be sunny. Those that did last year were probably greeted by fairly miserable conditions, but tomorrow looking at a nice little sunrise, and also just a small amount of cloud developing. So nice blue skies, put your sun cream on, it is going to be a nice day. Air temperatures will pick up from initially sort of 12 degrees up to 17 to 18. Obviously in the breeze we're expecting, you can expect it to feel a little bit colder. Sea temperatures are quite warm, though I'm not expecting any of you to go for a swim, so that's just more for reference. And you've got your sort of high water, low water times for Portsmouth to guide you with your tidal atlases. So that's sort of starting off with the kind of real background weather information that helps you decide what clothes you're going to put on. I would essentially still wrap up pretty well because, as I said, it's going to be quite breezy. If we go ahead and start looking now at the synoptic situation, this is starting at 6 o'clock this evening and rolling into the end of the race tomorrow. As you can see, it's a relatively static situation. We've got a low pressure over to the north of the UK, and that's maintaining a southwesterly airflow over the area. Not expecting a huge amount of change in the direction as we go through the course of the day. You'll just start to see at the end of the sequence here, as we go into the late evening tomorrow, that the wind will start to track round to the west, but I'm pretty sure you will all have finished your race by that stage. So that's just the sort of overview. As I said, not expecting any frontal systems or any major change in the wind direction. And again, just here, oh, I might just have to hit play on this one, sorry. Just now looking at it with the wind arrows on there. So where you've got two long lines, you're looking at sort of a 20 knot wind. And as you can see, very static over the area, looking at essentially a sort of 20 knot breeze across the area for the course of Saturday there. So in terms of the main situation, we're not looking for any frontal system features to really clear through. I mean, this is a snapshot of what we've got now and what we've had today. So these purple lines indicate basically an occluded front, so a band of cloud and rain. And so today we've seen a bit of that this morning and some showers. But as we go through into tomorrow, as you can see, don't get a huge amount of movement, and essentially we're between those two frontal systems. So expecting nice clear skies, and as I said, just a small amount of cloud to develop. So thinking about it as we get to the start of the race. So start time, obviously, it's going to be pretty busy. And so probably one of the key things is initially, when you're not in your sequence, there are two waiting areas, and if you can try and keep those waiting areas, it means that the right boats have the space to do their start at the right time, because otherwise it can be pretty busy. And also, I'm sure if you've done it before, it can be pretty annoying if there's someone on your start line who isn't actually starting when you are. So again, just take note of where they are and try and keep into those holding areas. It also means things like the ferries know where you're going to be hanging out as well. So then moving on and thinking about the actual wind at start time, so this is sort of 7 to 9 o'clock, not expecting a huge change. The key thing here is for the early starters, they could well see the wind potentially as light as 13 knots, but typically we're looking at 13 to 16 knots from the southwest there. But obviously, as you can see even on this chart, as you head west, the wind is already that bit stronger at 16 to 18. So expecting that wind to build up as we go through. So just thinking about that start line and where you might consider starting when it comes to it, just sort of thinking obviously with that wind direction that tucked right up in along this shoreline, you're going to find the winds are that bit lighter. So you might want to step off the shoreline a bit in order to get into the slightly stronger breeze initially. And also as you head off to the west, you will find as well that wind bends round Gurnard Head. So again, looking at using that to help you up to the Needles, because you're going to be tacking up through the Solent. Obviously with high water at 8:30, there is going to be plenty of water in the Solent, so you are going to have the whole area of water to use. You're not going to be confined to a certain area. Probably one of the key things as well at start time is going to be the tide, and probably critical subtle change between sort of 7:30 and those guys that are starting after 7:30. The early starters are potentially going to still have a little bit of tide against them. That will quickly change. By 7:30, expecting the tide to be going with you and also to have evened out across the Solent. But for those early starters, I think you will all be trying to jostle for this inshore position to get the benefit of that tide as you start the race. But by 8:30, expecting that tide to have turned across the whole of the Solent, and therefore you're not really, you can use the whole of that start line. You're not getting the tidal gain. You're probably going to start putting more preference to where you're getting the cleanest wind on that start line. Obviously, one thing that probably stands out quite nicely is there is a bit of a band of stronger tide just as we go round the corner here. So you'll probably be looking at getting your first tack to be taking you in to the headland here, so that you then get that stronger tide as you head up. But otherwise, essentially, as you head towards the Needles, the main band of tide, as we'll see, in fact, on the next slide, but we'll see that the main band of tide is basically to the south of these channel markers, and so you're going to be wanting to stay in this kind of region. I've sort of tried to draw on there what I think would be essentially a fairly ideal way to go. As I said, for these late starters, not necessarily essential to be right on the shoreline, but then really trying to aim to get into this tidal gain feature with your first tack, and then again pushing back out offshore to get the stronger tide. So just thinking about those sort of key things at the start of the race. I suspect though, one thing is it will be very busy, so the other, with the tide evening out, you might find that actually it's just as good to potentially avoid that group of boats and go round them, so that you're not getting put about unnecessarily. You're not having to tack where you don't want to because there's boats there. That actually it's far better that you just do the 2 tacks rather than suddenly 6 tacks, because there's 20 odd boats around you. So just be aware of that. Try to weigh up the benefit between those two things. As we then head down to the Needles, as I said, we're expecting this wind to build throughout the morning, and also obviously classically for anyone that has sailed in the Solent, as you go down towards the Needles, you've got this narrow gap that the wind's trying to funnel through. So it's always a good sort of 5 knots stronger at the Needles than what you get at sort of Central Cowes area. Some of the other things to look out for wind-wise, obviously, is with that southwesterly wind, the wind will be sort of funneling out of some of these valleys. So looking at Yarmouth and also Newtown Creek, finding that wind a little bit further left. So again, making sure that you're heading in towards those areas to use that sort of port tack to lift you up along the shoreline and give you a better angle towards the Needles. So again, potentially some gain points. And again, as you approach the Needles and sort of exiting out past Hurst Castle, one of the sort of key things is again that you'll find that as you go through that gap, the wind will actually go slightly further right. So really, you want to be approaching this exit coming out on starboard, and you'll get nicely lifted. And also with the tide, you could well, if you get it right, you should make it quite nicely towards the Needles, she says. So again, they're just sort of talking about the key things. I already touched on the first yellow arrow there, indicating that both a tidal gain, but also that wind coming off coming off the land here, and again, just to indicate those points I've just made, coming into Yarmouth, getting a nice lift potentially across over towards sort of Hurst Castle area, and again then tacking back out and finding that wind again lifting you back towards the Needles. So sort of that kind of route, looking again like sort of where you could potentially see some gain features. At this situation as well, as I said, the tide will have turned and is rushing you along to the Needles. Really strong tide here, so by the time you get up there, you're looking at sort of almost 4 knots for many. So just be aware of that. That will make your ley lines. So you might think, oh, if I go now, I'll get to the Needles, but actually that tide will take you well beyond it. And if you go too far, you'll find you'll almost have to battle against it. So just be aware that that'll help you. And obviously with that tide pushing you up into the wind, it's also going to make the wind seem stronger. I mean, all the wind strengths I've given are, ground wind if you stood there on the shoreline, but when you've got 4 knots of tide pushing you into it, you suddenly effectively got sort of 4 knots of breeze more. So again, just remember that the stronger tide you get into, the windier it will get. So thinking about getting around the Needles, best advice, just go outside all the hazards. I know people like to think about cutting the corner, but it is going to be windy, there is going to be a big swell, and it is pretty close to cut that corner. So, and as you can see here with the tidal situation, you will have some standing waves. You effectively got 2 tidal flows against each other. So just be aware of that, and you make sure you're on your chart plotters if you're thinking, well, even going around it, let alone if you're thinking of cutting the corner. As I said as well, also this is the point where you might want to think about your sail change as you turn the corner to head down to St Catherine's. If we zoom in a bit, just to sort of show you those hazards that you need to avoid. You've obviously got the lighthouse, but there's also the wreck further to the southwest. Obviously, the tide will help sort of push you away from those features if you go around the outside. If you do think about cutting the corner, don't just follow someone who's gone through. This is a sort of schematic to try and show. So say this person's already through and you're here and you're thinking, I know, I'll just follow them. They've got through and not hit. They actually probably started off over here, but because of the tide, they've ended up there, and because of the angle they've taken. Whereas if you set off there, you'll probably end up straight on the wreck. So just be really conscious if you're actually considering it. Make sure you know exactly where you are. You've got your chart plotter out, and you don't just follow the person in front, because you probably won't look too bright when you're sat on the wreck. So going round, once you've gone round the corner, as I said, one of the big things, we've had some good strong breezes over the last couple of days, so we've got a reasonable swell set up. You're probably going to have sort of 6 to 9 foot swell from the southwest. It could get up to 12 foot at times, so that's going to be one sort of feature, and obviously side-on conditions. And also you'll see that wind build getting up to sort of 20 to 24 knot mean, and gusting higher than that, sort of 28 to 30 knots. As I say, this is where the sleigh ride begins. We're starting to think downhill all the way, but it's obviously going to be a bit lively and quite wet at this point. The key thing here is not really expecting much change in the wind. You're not going to get much benefit from what's going on with the wind. But when we think about the tide, when you first go round, there is potentially basically a tidal gain by staying within sort of 1.5 miles of the shoreline. Well, if you're inside that, generally you've got the weaker tide. And then as you get closer to St Catherine's Point, you do start to see the tide turn earlier there, just off Chale. So again, you might want to just dip in a little bit closer, and you'll actually have a favourable tide inshore there, right along the shoreline. So that's sort of the key thing on that leg, will just be potentially getting some tidal relief and not ending up too far offshore. As you get to St Catherine's Point, it's probably going to be the windiest point as well, up at sort of 24 to 28 knots. And still very much from the southwest, and again just being aware of sort of fairly strong sea conditions. And then you'll be setting off down to Bembridge, and it will be very much sort of jibing down to Bembridge. And again, that leg will be predominantly dominated by a couple of tidal gain features that I will touch on, because not expecting a huge amount of change in the wind direction. Obviously the big waves, you've really got to use those to try and get you through the jibes. Make sure you pick yourself a nice wave and don't rush it. I mean, it's better to stay upright than sort of rush a jibe, because as I said, I don't think you're going to get many major gains from the wind conditions around the back of the island. So the key change you'll see from going from having come from the Needles round to going to Bembridge is obviously the land will start to make that wind bend round a bit more. So even though you think, oh, it's 240, 250, it'll probably find it'll go a bit further round to the left with that land and try and align a bit more to the island shoreline. So as we get to this point, depending on what time you get there, so sort of between 10 and 1 o'clock, then the key thing, as I said already, on the approach, be looking to tuck in inshore, and also when you come out at St Catherine's, again looking to stay inshore, to stay in that slightly lighter, slightly weaker tide. But if you look further along down that leg there, you'll see that actually when you get past Ventnor and start to get towards Sandown, that the weaker tide is potentially slightly further offshore. So there is a call for staying not reasonably inshore here, and then actually being able to head offshore to get into that slightly weaker tide offshore. And that's a fairly dominant feature for the majority of that time period. It's only as we get a little bit later on, if you're not getting around there till sort of 1, maybe 3 o'clock, then you'll start to see it goes a bit more. It starts to go slack inshore, but essentially that tide has turned, and then you're almost looking at when you come round potentially going not necessarily hugging that shoreline if you are that bit later. That, as I said, is not expected to happen until sort of 1:30. But then the key changes there will be obviously not necessary to go right inshore, and then obviously pretty much just go the quickest route. So hopefully by this point we won't all be too tired and broken. And we'll be looking forward to our last little trip back into the Solent. By this stage, depending if you're super quick boat, you could well be still looking at sort of 22 to 26 knots. Those that are a bit later, you will see that wind much more at the sort of 28 to 30 knot region. Sea conditions obviously just coming off the last part of Bembridge there, still looking relatively big. But again, we're looking here at thinking about how the wind is funneling out of those valleys and round the headlands. As you turn into the zone, you will get some protection initially, just as you go round the corner from the land. That will mean the wind just eases up a bit. But once you come up to the finish line, you're going to be back to where it's funneling into the Solent. It's coming a bit more from the westerly direction, and wind strengths will be up again at that point. But probably the biggest thing on this leg will be the tide, because once you turn that corner, you're looking at going back against the tide. Those that are early starters and quick round the corner will be again turning and expecting to go against a foul tide. So you will still be looking to tack up that shoreline. There's a few things to consider before as you go up this leg. Is obviously at this kind of time it's going to be pretty low water in the Solent, so ride sands will be fairly prominent, and also there is the sea view exclusion zone, so don't go ruining your race by either going through that or hitting ride sands. But at this point, one of the lead boats could well find, other than tacking up the shoreline, that basically there's a benefit all the way up the shoreline, and potentially even some slack water, maybe a little bit of tide if they're there at sort of 12 o'clock, actually assisting them to the finish line. But I think for the majority of people, we're going to be looking more at this kind of situation. So still very much tide against, and still very much going up, still very much going up that shoreline along the left there, and tacking up that shoreline to get out of the tide. As I sort of said, some of the key things to really think about as you go up this last leg is going to be these exclusion zones, and also ride sands. So we've got a sea view exclusion zone marked on there. The two key things are sort of pier head and line post. As long as you keep them to port and don't dip inside them, then you should be pretty safe. But essentially you will be going up that shoreline, so it's definitely going to be something that you'll want to know where it is. And also once you go past that, you will still be wanting to hug fairly close to ride sands. So again, check your chart plotters and know exactly where you are, so that you don't end up parking yourself on ride sands for a bit before you finish your race. That could be not the most fun thing to have. And finally, the big finish. Probably a good idea to remember which one or at least have it written down, because nothing worse than suddenly going, oh hang on, just done 7 hours of racing, which finish line are we, north or south? And you don't want to be making that decision last minute with lots of boats trying to pick which line they're going to. You definitely don't want to be trying to cross paths at that stage. So make sure you know which your finish line is, and pick it good and early, and then you can have a nice finish without crashing into each other. So sort of to summarise, few main key points that just to consider for each leg. So start to the needles, use the wind funneling out of the valley, and don't overlay the needles. As I said, you've got that tide pushing you west as well. So just be conscious of how that tide's going to help you. Coupled with, as you come out of the Solent, that wind will also go further right. So you're going to end up with a double effect of the tide pushing you up with the increasing tide, and also that shift coming round and lifting you up as well. Needles, I'd just say go around the outside and look at your chart plotters, know where those hazards are. You really, you're going to be going reasonably quick at this point, so hitting anything at that stage and it's all pretty rock solid around there wouldn't be too good. Needles to St Catherine's Point, big swell, so that's probably one of the first things, but also that tidal gain. Just stay within sort of 1.5 miles of the shoreline, and you should stay out of the strongest tide. And obviously, as I touched on, as you get nearer St Catherine's Point, you can just dip in there off Chail and potentially get a little bit of tide helping you. And with that, essentially, you'll probably see a sea state change. So not quite so much wind against tide. So you might even find you've got slightly flatter conditions in there. Once you turn the corner at St Catherine's, going to Bembridge, again, as I said, the key thing will be just making sure you get those jibes in nicely. Trying to head in towards Ventnor to get the tidal gain of the slacker tide against you, and then from that point again probably stepping just offshore a little bit as you head towards Sandown to get the main tidal relief. Finally, Bembridge to home. Main thing, sort of chart plotters at the ready, up the island shoreline, avoiding wide sands, and also, as I said, sort of avoiding the sea view exclusion zone, so you know where those are. But again, looking at where those valleys are and the wind coming off the shoreline, you will find that the wind will puff off that shoreline and give you lifts as you go up that shoreline. So you will be wanting to get back in, and it'll be quite easy to be sort of a 200 metre distance but have quite a different wind direction. So you might sort of think, oh, we're okay, and then someone will tack up inside you and you'll find, oh, they've suddenly got a bit of pressure, a little lift, and just lifted up inside you. So it will still be quite a challenging end. You know, the race is by no means over, and obviously as everyone gets a bit tired there's almost bigger gains to be had at that stage. So hopefully that's all been helped you out and not put anyone off too much, I hope. If you haven't taken it all in, there's quite a bit there. You can re-watch this briefing online, so go to raymarine.co.uk, or you can watch it through Facebook. That's the Facebook names, and also there'll be through the Twitter link, and also on YouTube. But if anyone's got any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them. If anyone has any, yes. I think the max you'll see is probably 32, 33 knots, and that'll be towards the end of the day, so sort of 4 or 5 o'clock. But before that, definitely from 10, 11 o'clock, you're looking at up to 30 knot gusts. So you're only going to see that gust factor increase a little bit more. Magic. Has anyone got any more questions? Oh, yeah, cool. Enjoy your race, everyone.